Thor just finished speaking a second ago. Let everyone be careful, it is better than a big lizard appearing to eat everyone. As a result, the street under his feet instantly collapsed in the next second, and a cold-blooded lizard jumped out of the hole in an instant, biting the unsuspecting Thor and swallowing it into his stomach. OMG. God. Seeing this scene, everyone is not calm. Damn it, Thor got swallowed by this giant lizard? Without hesitation, he launched an attack on the giant lizard that swallowed Thor in one bite. It's a pity that the bullets and energy cannon bullets hit the giant lizard's skin, unable to break its defense at all. It's like being immune to any physical attack. Watch as Natasha Romanoff's bullets and Tony's palm energy cannon go nowhere. Su Che instantly threw out the black liquid, which adhered to the surface of the giant lizard. The moment a few drops of black profound liquid touched the giant lizard, there was a violent flame and explosion sound. The moment the smoke from the explosion dissipated, the giant lizard was still standing there firmly. A pair of eyes without any warmth looked at the Avengers people coldly. It seems to be preparing to treat everyone as food. Seeing that even the black mysterious liquid, which exploded 40 times as powerful as TNT, couldn't break the appearance of this giant lizard. Su Che frowned, then stretched out his hand and took out the supergiant's extremely sharp death blade. But before Su Che launched his attack with a solemn expression, the giant lizard, which was staring at the crowd, suddenly paused at this moment. Immediately afterwards, the body of the giant lizard began to change, and bursts of lightning began to flicker from the inside to the outside. The smell of burnt incense is very similar to the barbecue at the bonfire dinner last night, but it has not waited for the giant lizard to move. In the next second, his back exploded instantly, and Thor, who was full of the power of thunder, burst out of his body. Swinging the hammer and landing on the ground, the moment Thor landed, he kicked the self-shaped lizard that had been broken by himself into the bottom of the just collapsed street. Damn it! How did the Morakexi lizard appear on Earth? You know, this is the monster of Vanaheim. He said something indignantly, and then seemed to vent the anger that had just been swallowed up. Thor raised his hammer and summoned a bolt of lightning, directly venting his anger at the giant lizard whipped out of his body. After chopping several times in a row, only then did Thor put away the hammer, then glanced at the lizard slime on his body, and then said to Su Che, "Dude, give it to me." "No problem." Facing Thor's request, Su Che stretched out his hand, and a stream of clear water began to wash away the lizard's slime on Thor's body. Thor breathed a sigh of relief after the mucus was washed away. "Are you okay?" After watching Thor rinse off, Natasha Romanoff asked concerned. "It didn't suffer any harm, but that damned Molaxi lizard just now was really scary, and I can't figure out how it appeared on Earth. You must know that 1,400 years ago, that is, when I was more than 100 years old, Loki and I killed a lizard like this with our own hands. But at that time, I was too embarrassed. The defensive power of the Molaxi lizard's appearance is very amazing, and it can only be killed from the inside. So much so that since then, I have had some psychological shadows on lizards." Speaking of this, Thor held the hammer angrily, and glanced at the giant lizard that he had kicked into the cavern of the collapsed street. "After going back this time, we must let K. Money will do. Damn lizard, you have to pay more." Just when everyone was attracted by Thor, Hulk, who had just untied the giant wolf, jumped back. He tilted his head and glanced at Barton and Steve, then stretched out his green finger to touch Su Che. Watching Hao greet him, Su Che turned his head and looked in the direction of Hulk's finger. "I don't know when." Steve held the shield as if he was fighting against the air, while Barton looked like a blind man, with a rare and frightened expression with his mouth open but silent. He fumbled for something in the air, and these two people are getting farther and farther away, even several meters away from everyone. Seeing this scene, Su Che immediately stepped forward and stopped the two of them. "Damn it. I was so focused on Thor and the lizard just now that I didn't realize what happened to Steve and Clint. What happened to them?" Tony and Natasha Romanoff, who followed along, looked at Steve and Barton, who seemed to be trapped in their own world. Couldn't help but stepped forward and asked. It should be confused by spiritual magic. He stretched out his hand and shook it in front of Barton, seeing that he didn't respond at all. Even Steve, who was held down, was still struggling constantly, as if he wanted to break through the enemy's shackles. Su Che immediately cast a psychic magic to restore the sanity of the two of them. As the mind magic took effect, Steve, who had been struggling, gradually stopped moving, and Hawkeye's flustered face gradually calmed down. In the next second, the two of them gasped violently. Seeing this, Natasha Romanoff immediately came to the two people and asked, "Are you two okay? What happened just now?" "Have no idea." Looking at the concerned eyes of Natasha Romanoff in front of him, Barton glanced around with lingering fear. "I don't know exactly what happened, but I couldn't see anything with my eyes just for a moment. I can't hear any sound in my ears. I want to shout loudly, but I can't even make a sound. It seems that the five senses are blocked. Damn it. That kind of silence and closure, as if a person is in the endless silent darkness, is simply too real." As he spoke, Barton wiped his forehead with his hand. The palms are full of sweat. On the other hand, Steve took a deep breath, and then said to the crowd, "You said, I was fighting against the air with a shield just now? Sue. There's a good chance this is mind control again, and it's a very real one. The moment Thor was swallowed by a giant lizard, I saw the Red Skull led by John Schmidt appear. What's more, everything feels so real, even the Hydra soldiers I knocked down are so real that they don't look like illusions." Listen to Steve and Barton. Su Che frowned and Tony looked at each other. "So, in this fog, what we see or attack us is actually what we fear most in our hearts." With some uncertainty, Tony Stark immediately said to Su Che, "Dude, quickly use your mind magic to me. I don't want to see those scenes." Everyone has the most fear in their hearts, or the thing they are least willing to face. But at this moment, the fog that shrouded Zijing Town seemed to have become a materialized existence of fear. Floating ash in the sky, in front of him is an endless fog. Tony said there must be no monsters, that a bloodthirsty giant wolf came out of the mist. Thor has a very psychological shadow on the giant lizard, and he was swallowed by the lizard in an instant. As an archer, what is Barton most afraid of? Definitely loss of sight, hearing, and even speech ability. So just now Barton entered the endless darkness. Steve also got entangled with old rival John Schmidt. After all, for the current Steve, Red Skull John Schmidt has made a comeback, and conquering the world is the most unacceptable thing in his heart. 397 may just be because the fog cannot manifest the living fearful person or thing. So Steve can only fight John Schmidt in the spirit world. Well, as we all know, Red Skull is not alive. Everyone, don't think wildly. The fog is likely to manifest the most feared thing in everyone's heart. A layer of spiritual barrier is set up for everyone to prevent the most feared thing in the heart from being drawn out by the fog of fear. Only then did Su Che lead the crowd to move on. This time, all members of the Avengers Alliance were highly concentrated, and even Hulk clenched his fists and looked around vigilantly. Just a few hundred meters away, a tall church suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking the way. What a nasty trick. Looking at the tall church in front of him, Steve held the shield and looked at the crowd. Who would set the church in the middle of the road? As soon as the voice fell, the originally closed door of the church slowly opened. The thick wooden doors of the church also creaked. There are rows of seats inside the church, and the sculptures in front of the seats are not statues of the Virgin Mary or Jesus. It's a statue of Loki with curved horns. Waterlaw? Looking at the statue of Loki with arms outstretched, Tony Stark subconsciously cursed, and then everyone turned their heads to look at Thor. Well, facing the eyes of everyone, Thor raised his hand very honestly and said, "This is not something I imagined, although Loki really wants to be a hero respected by all Asgard's people and warriors, and build such a sculpture for himself. But guys, if it's really me who imagined it and then materialized, then the sculpture should be in my image. How can it be a sculpture of Loki?" Hearing what Thor said, everyone nodded. Well, Thor's answer makes sense. So, what now? Go around. Looking at the church in front of him, Tony Stark spread his hands. I'll try to see if there is another way. As he said that, Tony controlled the armor to take off, trying to fly over the church. As a result, just after flying above the church, an invisible barrier directly blocked Tony back. Undeterred, Tony Stark was about to pass in the other direction, flying over the roofs next to the streets of West Nose Town. But without exception, they were blocked again. In the end, he could only control the battle armor to land slowly, and then said to Su Che and the others, "Everyone, it seems that if you want to move on, you can only walk in the direction of the church. Why don't you try to blow up this damn factory? Let me do it. Look at the smiling Loki statue inside the church." Thor raises his hammer to call lightning, then slams it down towards the side of the church. Boom. Crack. A huge amount of lightning fell from above, but the church standing in the middle of the road was not damaged at all. Even the top of the church, which was supposed to be an upright cross, turned into two daggers at this moment, did not suffer any damage. Seeing that the thunder did not shatter the church, Thor quickly swung the hammer, and then smashed it directly at the building of the false church. But the moment the hammer hit the building, it had no effect except for a loud bang. Retracting the hammer, Thor turned his head to look at the crowd and shook their heads. "Well, it seems that if you want to pass this level, you have to go in." Seeing that Thor's attack was fruitless, Su said to everyone, "Be careful." After speaking, Su Che walked in first. "Damn it, the second enemy created by this system is just a magician, but it feels harder than Sorcerer Supreme. In fact, each of the enemies created by the system has its own consciousness. And have no doubts about the identity of the system arrangement. So what kind of choice do you have to know what kind of attack to use? This is simply out of control. Even Su Che, the host, has no idea what the enemies created by the system will do. But there is one thing Su Che is absolutely sure of. That is, one-on-one, Su Che is absolutely sure to crush them to death. Be the first to make your way to the church that houses the Loki sculpture." The moment he just entered the church, Su Che, who was wary in his heart, suddenly felt a sense of comfort and warmth. It's like a warm sun shining on the body in the cold and biting winter. It's like drinking a cold drink on a hot summer day. That kind of refreshing, that kind of comfort that grows from the bottom of my heart is so real. This has gone far beyond the illusion created by spiritual magic. Unconsciously let people relax their vigilance. Not just Su Che, other Avengers members, including Hulk, who is always full of anger in his heart. The moment they stepped into the church, they all had an instinctive comfort in their hearts. Others are able to persevere not to be ruled by this comfort. But Hulk grinned, found a random chair and sat down. The anger in his eyes slowly disappeared, and a giggle came out of his mouth. "It's really irresistible." Unconsciously opened the armor, Tony Stark walked out of the armor. "God, I feel at this moment." Tony. Looking at Tony Stark, who subconsciously left the armor and walked towards the sculpture of Loki. Steve grabbed him quickly, and then stuffed him into the fully open Mark armor. "That's right, just stuff it in." The whole process was quick, but Steve had an instinctive vigilance. This feeling is very similar to the moment when I was injected with super soldier serum and changed from thin to strong. Damn it, with sus spiritual magic, fear and loneliness can't stop everyone. So use that heartfelt warmth and comfort instead to keep yourself from waiting? Thinking of this, Steve turned his head to look at Su Che. Just seeing this, Steve's heart suddenly turned cold. Oh shit. I turned around and realized that I don't know when. Su Che and Natasha Romanoff, who were not attacked in the fog of fear, sat on the chairs in the church unconsciously. And in front of it is the statue of Loki. Seeing this scene, Tony Stark was awakened instantly by Steve returning to the armor. Immediately wanted to step forward and pull Su Che and Natasha Romanoff back. But just as he stretched out his hand, Steve stopped him from playing. Wait a moment. He looked at Su Che, who was sitting there with his eyes closed, as if he had fallen into an illusion. Steve stopped Tony's movements. Look, Hulk is sitting there with a very comfortable expression, as if he has fallen into a sweet dream. But Natasha Romanoff and Sus expressions are not so indulging, so I think they should do it on purpose. Don't forget, Su knows mind magic. Hearing Steve's words, Tony Stark hesitated for a moment, then slowly withdrew his hand. In the next second, the Loki statue standing above the church directly emitted a burst of light. Su Che, Natasha Romanoff and Hulk were enveloped by a soft white light. In the blink of an eye, a three-dimensional image similar to a holographic projection appeared in front of everyone. In the first projection, the Hulk sits quietly on an island beach. The breeze is gentle and the sun is warm. The seagulls flew on the sea and sang sweetly, and the palm leaves rustled with the wind. There are no enemy attacks, no fear and screams from passers-by. From time to time, some children ran to play with Hulk, as if they were not afraid of him at all. Some naughty kids even climbed on top of Hulk, asking Hulk to throw him in the air and take over. Looking around, it is full of laughter, peace and tranquility. This should be the most anticipated thing in Hulk's heart. Looking at the first holographic projection, Steve held the shield and said softly, "Don't forget, even we just saved the world some time ago." But the internet is still full of comments about Hulk. After all, Hulk caused a lot of chaos when he fought the abomination in the streets of New York. A large part of the population is still terrified of the Hulk. Even though Hulk doesn't know, Dr. Ney can see it on the internet. And Dr. Banner and Hulk figured it out. So, people on Earth don't hate or fear Hulk. This should be what Hulk looks forward to most. Listening to Steve's soft words, Tony Stark was silent for a while. It seems quite happy to be trapped in the illusion, but you shouldn't have stopped me just now. You sure? Well, I'm just talking casually. Shrugging his shoulders, Tony Stark turned his head to look at Barton and said, "Dude, you and Natasha Romanoff used to be partners. What do you think is Natasha Romanoff's wonderful fantasy?" "Should be family." Facing Tony's inquiry, Clint Barton held the arrow and looked around vigilantly. Even the moment of stepping into the pseudo-church, the extremely relaxed comfort still didn't make Barton put down the bow and arrow in his hand. "But if I could, I'd really like to swap Garden of Fear and Wonderland." The feeling that the five senses were closed and he couldn't hear or see just now still made Barton feel a little palpitating. On the other hand, Thor, staring at the statue of Loki, wondered what he was thinking. Hulk's illusion projection ended, and he was still sitting on the bench laughing. Next, Natasha Romanoff's wonderful illusion stereoscopic projection. In the projection, Natasha Romanoff came to the table with breakfast, while two lovely boys and girls were calling mommy sweetly. Make breakfast for the children, and drive the children to and from school in person. It can be seen that this very ordinary life makes Natasha Romanoff very intoxicated. Especially listening to two 4- or 5-year-old children calling mommy intimately. At that moment, Natasha Romanoff in reality burst into tears, but Natasha Romanoff's heart in the stereoscopic projection almost melted. Damn it. See this scene. Barton couldn't bear it anymore, picked up the bow and arrow and shot at the statue of Loki. The arrow exploded the instant it hit the Loki statue. But unfortunately, it still didn't have any impact on the 3-meter-high sculpture. As for Natasha Romanoff, it seems that she is still indulging in the illusion of beauty and cannot extricate herself. "Clint?" Seeing that Barton's face was a bit ugly, Steve asked quickly. It's just that Barton didn't speak. He just looked at Natasha Romanoff, who was crying on the bench, and the distress in his eyes couldn't be hidden no matter what. Others do not know. As Barton, who personally recruited her to S.H.I.E.L.D. and then partnered with her. How could you not know that Natasha Romanoff will never have a child that belongs to her in this life? This is the biggest regret in her life, and it is also the source of the most pain in her heart. Calm down, man. It was the first time I saw such a strong hostility emanating from Barton. Tony hurriedly stepped forward to comfort him. "It's all fake, buddy, it's just an illusion. Trust me. Sue will definitely find a way." Listening to Tony's persuasion, the violence in Barton's eyes kept flickering, and Yurihong also held the bow and arrow tightly. After a while, the anger in the eyes disappeared, and the hand holding the arrow string was slowly released. "Call." With a long sigh of relief, Barton bowed his head and cursed. Then put a hand on Natasha Romanoff's shoulder. Seems like comforting. It also seems to be persuading. Next second, Natasha Romanoff also suddenly raised her hand and held Barton's hand instead. "I'm fine, let me take another look." Obviously, Natasha Romanoff did not really indulge in the wonderful illusion, but was still able to perceive what happened in reality. Having said that, Natasha Romanoff still didn't open her eyes. Seeing that Natasha Romanoff was able to perceive reality, Barton stepped forward and gently hugged Natasha Romanoff's shoulder without speaking. On the contrary, Thor clenched his fists and looked around constantly, not knowing what he was thinking at the moment. Natasha Romanoff's stereoscopic projection ends. Soon, the projection of Su Che's wonderful illusion appeared in front of everyone. With the projection of Su Che's wonderful illusion, the scene immediately made everyone gasp, cold. Jesus above. Oh my God. Oh whoa, havoc. Even Steve, who has always been calm, couldn't help but swear when he saw Su Che's wonderful illusion with his own eyes. Tony on the side covered his forehead in surprise, and didn't know what to say for a while. Natasha Romanoff, who was embraced by Barton, slowly opened her eyes and forcibly retracted her mind. Just looking at the projection in Su Che's wonderful illusion, his pupils contracted unconsciously. This picture, I have seen it myself. That is a scene of the end of the world. The mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. The calm and vast sea began to boil and evaporate, and rows of tall buildings collapsed. Looking around, the whole world is in ruins. The fearful wails of countless creatures wandered between the heavens and the earth. The sobbing sounds were extremely bleak. It seemed that despair was the only color of this planet. In the middle of the picture, Steve collapsed into the building with an expression of unwillingness. The indestructible shield in his hand has become torn apart at this moment. Tony Stark's battle armor was broken, and he knelt on one knee, already dead. Barton's bowstring breaks. Thor Mjolnir loses its luster. Natasha Romanoff fell on the boulder without breathing, and Hulk lay motionless on the ground. The entire Avengers fell. Between the world full of wind and whimpering, only Su Che, covered in blood, remained unyielding, pointing at the guy who seemed to be at the same level as the mountains of the world with the tip of his knife. Although the expression is still unyielding, although the body is still tall and straight, even though it is only me, but I still have to fight for the earth to the last moment. But in the eyes, it has long lost its previous color. Behind him, under the collapsed building that symbolizes the Avengers Alliance, are the partners who used to get along day and night and fought side by side. But now, only Su Che is left alone to continue fighting. Oh my God. Seeing this scene of the stereoscopic projection, Tony Stark looked at Steve with a pale face. Damn it, isn't this a wonderful illusion? Why is it called wonderful? I also don't know why this happened when it was Sus' turn. Tightly holding the shield in his hand, he watched the picture freeze at this scene. Steve shook his head with a shaky voice. Only Natasha Romanoff was in an extremely agitated mood at the moment. She has seen this scene. It was in the black gold diary that Sue once wrote, what his world looked like before it was destroyed. All the members of the same Avengers fell, and the same doomsday unfolded. Damn it, when the words in the diary turned into real pictures. Only now did Natasha Romanoff realize the lingering sense of despair in Sus' heart. It's so small. Facing the guy in the picture who seems to have the same file size as the mountains in the sky. Sue Lonely's figure was extremely depressing and small. It seems to really confirm the metaphor of Loki and Nick Fury's shoes and ants. At this moment, Su Che is really like an unyielding ant in front of that giant. Although the ants tried to raise their arms to resist, they could not escape the fate of being crushed to death. With a long sigh of relief, Natasha Romanoff raised his hand to wipe away the tears on his face. Well, this is not the last scene of the parallel universe Sue is in. According to the description of the desperate scene in the Black Gold Diary, there are no figures of myself, Steve, and Tony anymore. And in this picture, there is no Wanda, no Ant-Man female Hulk. However, is this scene the most worrying thing in Sus' heart? Is he most afraid that this universe will not escape the same fate as the universe he once lived in? His eyes swept over Su Che, who was sitting there with his eyes closed and unable to show any expression. Natasha Romanoff clenched her fist subconsciously, scanning the expressions of other members of the Avengers Alliance. Well, maybe other members of the Avengers Alliance don't understand Sus, fear, and despair. But Natasha Romanoff knew that the scene that showed Su Che's heart at this moment was exactly what he had personally experienced. Just when the Avengers Alliance members were overwhelmed by the picture presented by Su Che. Su Che, who was originally sitting there expressionless, suddenly asked, "Is this what you want to see? Cooperate with the guy who sealed Westview Town with a magic barrier, use the fog of fear to know the fear in the hearts of Avengers members, and then use the wonderful illusion to know the weaknesses of Avengers Alliance members. Now, I present to you what I fear the most in my heart. So, is this what you want to see? Don't forget, the Earth has this fate, but Asgard, which is the Asgardian of the 9 realms, should have been destroyed before this. You should have figured that out. Sigh. As Suche's voice fell, Thor instantly raised his hammer and smashed it at Loki's tall building. From the moment he saw the Loki sculpture, Thor felt something was wrong. And from this sculpture, Thor can clearly sense the aura that belongs to Loki. So when other Avengers Alliance members all watched the stereoscopic projection created by the wonderful illusion, Thor has been vigilant around, and at the same time wants to see what kind of tricks Loki is playing. When Suche directly said Loki's name, Thor couldn't bear to pick up the hammer and smash it. The moment Mjolnir slams into the Loki sculpture, the originally tall sculpture flashed a flash of light, and then Loki in classic leather appeared in front of everyone. Surprise! Spreading his hands and looking at the crowd, Loki raised his eyebrows and smiled. Wow, I really didn't expect that you could actually do it. Before he finished speaking, he saw Thor rushing over in an instant. Then he grabbed Loki's neck and pressed it against the wall. Loki, what the hell are you doing? Besides, you made that damn giant lizard, no one else knows about it. Are not you just saw it? Facing the irritable Thor, Loki smiled without any fear. Besides, as a villain, if you don't make trouble, wouldn't it be a waste of your status? Listen. Loki doesn't have any words of rebuttal. Thor roared angrily, but Steve stepped forward and said to Loki, what about last night? What county last night? Listening to Steve's inexplicable words coming forward, Loki raised his eyebrows and said, have you been invaded by fear? Speaking of this, Loki looked at Suche and asked, but I really want to know, how did you pass through the wonderful illusion and become the fearful realm? Damn it. Answer our questions first. Throwing Loki to the ground, Thor held Mjolnir and said angrily, you gave Sue something again last night and you told me with tears in your eyes that it's been a while. It turned out that just after one night, you became like this again. Loki, what are you trying to do? Wait. What are you talking about? Loki, who finally realized something was wrong, stood up neatly from the ground and looked at the members of Avengers. What last night? What was given to Su Dongzi with tears in his eyes? Damn it. What the hell are you bastards talking about? Looking at Loki is indeed a look of ignorance. Only then did everyone in the Avengers Alliance believe that the Loki in front of them was really not the Loki who appeared last night. So, who was Loki who appeared last night? And what appeared last night was indeed Rocky. Should be the Loki of the parallel universe. Getting up from the bench, Suche said to everyone, the Loki we saw last night, although I don't know how he came to this universe. But obviously, it should be related to TVA. After the matter of Westview Town is resolved, I will tell you about the matter of the Time Administration. But now, it's not the time to say that. With that said, Suche came to Loki and looked straight into his eyes. How about that scene just now? Your brother died in battle, and everyone died in battle. But before that, do you think Asgard can't exist? If Asgard was blown to ashes, and all Asgard's people died in that disaster, would you feel hopeless? Loki, I've seen and experienced more desperate things, so I don't want to see this happen again. Speaking of, Suche stretched out his hand and patted Loki's shoulder. Stop being obsessed, Loki, you don't want to lose your favorite Asgard either. Listening to Suche's words, Tony Stark had a strange expression. How do you feel that this kind of tone is similar to the tone in those movies that I have watched and lived a good life? Ma'am, you don't want your husband to lose his job either. Ma'am, you don't want Zhengshang to be dismissed by the school either. Cough cough. Get this weird thought out of your head. Tony Stark continued to stare at Loki. Hey, I'm the first in line to the throne of Jotunheim. Do you think my favorite will be Asgard? Spreading his hands and looking at Suche, Lu Ji looked cynical. I don't care. You sure? Before Loki could finish speaking, Suche stretched out his hand instantly, and spiritual magic was directly injected into Loki's spiritual world. In the next second, the scene of Asgard's destruction appeared in front of the roadbed. The flame giant, tens of meters high, is constantly destroying Asgard with a sharp blade. Hordes of monsters are wreaking havoc in Asgard. The armored warriors of Asgard wanted to resist but could do nothing. Countless civilian wolves of Asgard are still unable to escape the claws of monsters. Scenes unfolded in Loki's mind. In an instant, Loki, who was originally tall and straight, began to tremble unconsciously, and even his forehead was covered with sweat. Enough. Accompanied by a roar from the heart. Loki took 2 steps back, panting heavily, and looked at Suche angrily. Do you think these pictures can make me succumb? You damn second-rate magician. I'm Loki, the first day of the 9 realms magician. Damn it. I will never give in to you. Are you sure? Staring at the gradual stop of the trembling body, panting heavily, but the flow of sweat is still on the forehead. Under the extremely angry expression, Loki hides all kinds of fears. Suche didn't say anything more, just repeated, "Are you sure? You ignorant earthlings, you ignorant ant. I am a god, the god of jokes and lies from Asgard." In his mouth, he kept saying various metaphors of ants and shoes in an angry tone. But all the members of the Avengers alliance present could tell from Loki's tone that he was weaker than before. After a while, Loki gradually stopped cursing, then gave a dejected laugh, and stretched out his hand. 10 small red balls of pigeon eggs file size slowly appeared on Loki's thumb and forefinger. Between. The wonderful illusion is created by me using this thing that enhances magic originally. This is the second-rate magician who found me and gave it to me. Although the second-rate demon magician is always talking about the great master coming, he is just a messenger or something. But this guy's strength is really good. Saying that, Loki directly threw the small red pigeon egg file-size ball to Suche. My relationship with Earth isn't that good, so don't even think about asking me to help you deal with that guy. As Loki threw the red ball to Suche, the teaching that people were in gradually began to blur. The surrounding chairs began to turn into mottled spots of light and soar up, and gradually everyone reappeared on the streets of Zijing Town. Hulk, who was still silent in the wonderful illusion, was suddenly pulled back to reality and looked around blankly. Even though I was playing with those children at the beach last second, why are those gentle breezes, calm beaches and those children gone? He looked at the ash with a puzzled face, and the ashes kept falling from the sky around the streets. The next second he clenched his fist suddenly, because he saw Loki. The stupid big man. Locked by Hulk's gaze, Loki subconsciously took a step back. The scene of being grabbed by both legs and smashed to the ground is still vivid. I don't want to spend even 1 second longer with this berserk beast. Taking out the Tesseract, Loki looked at everyone and said, "It's my limit to be able to do this, I'm not going to help you." Seeing the space tunnel appear behind Loki, Natasha Romanoff immediately stepped forward and called out to Loki. "What's the matter?" Although a little impatient, Loki just wanted to get out of this damned place and escape the sight of that green rampant beast. To avoid being smashed to the ground by that guy grabbing his legs again. But listening to Natasha Romanoff stopped herself. Loki still maintains the most basic understanding of Asgard. You just said that the guy who covered Westview Town with a magic barrier and created a fog of fear. What did you say that the great master came, and he was just a messenger? Facing Natasha Romanoff's inquiry, Loki laughed. Yes, that's what he claimed to be. Oh, and he said that all his abilities were bestowed by that master. If this is the case, then you have to be careful. After speaking, Loki opened the space teleportation channel with the Tesseract, and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. Seeing Loki disappear, Natasha Romanoff turned his head to look at Suche with a solemn expression. The guy Loki mentioned just now reminds me of someone. Olivia Temple also claims to be a great master, a messenger of the gods, or something like that. So, if he is right, then he should be in the same category as Olivia Temple. Olivia Temple. Listening to Natasha Romanoff's words, Tony Stark, who was wearing a battle armor, walked over. The one who was blown up into the sky and released firework. But to be honest, when this happened, I seemed to be still being kidnapped. Speaking of which, not counting Steve, man, you should be the first superhero to enter the public eye. The title of Knight of the Silver Moon was also made at that time. Facing Tony's question, Suche nodded slightly. It's just that the expression is a little serious. I didn't expect it to be the messenger of the so-called god again. Everyone, if I guessed correctly, this incident probably happened because of me again. Say what to do. Facing Suche's serious expression, Tony Stark spread his hands indifferently. Aren't we a team? Since we are a team, then there is no need to say these. Tony's right. Nodding seriously, Steve clenched the shield tightly and said with a smile, helping each other and uniting together is what a team should do. And gods? Oh, I only believe in one god, is it me? Hearing Steve said that he only believes in one god, Thor suddenly poked his head and smiled and asked, Steve, the god you believe in should be me, haha, I didn't expect you to worship me so much. Facing Thor's feeling good about himself, everyone shook their heads speechlessly. Sir, something is flying towards this direction at a very high speed. According to the analysis, it should be a miniature missile. While everyone was still discussing something, the voice of Jarvis suddenly sounded in the headset. Hearing the reminder from Jarvis, Su-Che and Thor immediately stood in front of the crowd. Before the micro-missile flew over, Hulk roared first. Immediately, the whole person jumped up high and grabbed the tiny missile in midair. Grabbing the tiny missile that was flying towards everyone at an extremely fast speed, Hulk ignored the huge amounts of thrust of the missile, and threw the missile towards the magic barrier with a spin in the air. Boom! A violent explosion bloomed in the air, and even the gray and translucent magic barrier seemed to tremble from the explosion. Boom! Falling from the air to the ground, Hulk stepped on the ground with cracks. But his eyes are fixed on the front of the fog of fear. Hey, good job, big man. I'll be sure to treat you to a barbecue when I get back, as much as you want. Patting Hulk's arm, Tony Stark said with a smile. Facing Tony's praise, Hulk turned his head and grinned at Tony, then roared forward. The promised magician. Why did he even use the miniature missiles? Damn, he didn't rob my closed Stark Industrial Weapons Manufacturing Department. Casually making a complaint, Tony Stark's armor shoulders opened, and a palm-sized micro-missile lined up. Want to use high technology? Then let Tony Daddy tell you what a micro-missile is. After the words fell, the Stark miniature missiles instantly attacked the front where Hulk was staring at. Boom! After flying into the fog of fear, the slap-sized missile made a violent and dazzling explosion instantly. Seeing that the miniature missile he launched exploded violently in front of him, its power far surpassed the missile that Hulk threw out in the air just now. Even more than a dozen buildings on both sides of the road were affected and destroyed. Tony Stark spread his hands and said, Jarvis, record it for post-war compensation. Yes sir. There's no need for Tony. S.H.I.E.L.D. has joined forces with other departments to form a post-disaster management agency, which is dedicated to accounting, counting, maintenance and compensation. Listening to Tony Stark saying that he wants to make up, Natasha Romanoff explained with a smile. Tony Stark, the owner of Stark Industries, is known as one of the greatest geniuses of this century, a playboy, and a millionaire. Just as Natasha Romanoff's voice fell, a hoarse voice gradually came out from the fog ahead. Listening to this voice talking about himself, Tony Stark took a step forward. You forgot to say, I'm still a philanthropist, a member of Avengers, a superhero who just saved the world. Hero. Huh. Mentioning this title, a voice in the mist sneered. Soon, a chest armor that also had an arc reactor, dressed in a half armor, and holding two flashing whips in his hand, walked out of the mist. Looking at the whip in front of him, Tony Stark was silent for a few seconds. Hey, a fake with knotted hair, you're plagiarizing, do you know that? Damn imitator, maybe I should have applied for a patent when I made the arc reactor. After muttering something in a low voice, Tony Stark said to the two whips with electric current in front of him, tell me your name, long hair is imitating, and I promise that after the incident in Westview Town is over, I won't go to court to sue you. You. Sue me. Haha. It's like hearing the funniest joke of the century. Whipcord laughed for a while, and then said to Tony Stark, okay, my name is Ivan Vanke, you can sue me for imitating your arc reactor. But you have to leave Westview Town alive first. Seriously, you should be ashamed of yourself. The dignified billionaire has countless technological resources to create such a clumsy war. Look at me, I have nothing, but I can still create a more efficient and powerful armor than you. So I am the greatest genius of this century. Also, Tony Stark. The messenger rescued me from the prison with the purpose of seeking revenge on you. Although I don't care whether he is a messenger of the gods or not, as the son of Howard Stark, you will pay the price for what your father did. Water? Hearing Ivan Vanke's words, Tony Stark turned his head and looked at Su Che and Steve. Is this guy crazy? Isn't his nerves normal? After complaining, Tony Stark put his hands to his mouth. Dude, it's time. It's time to take the medicine. Obediently take the medicine for treating mental illness. Be obedient. Tony's father will love you. Facing Tony Stark's ridicule, Ivan Vanke was not angry either. He just raised his hand, and in the next second hundreds of steel robots appeared behind him in the mist. Oh shit, my Iron Armor Legion hasn't finished yet. I didn't expect it to be plagiarized again. Reluctantly complaining, Tony Stark turned his head and looked at the crowd. What are you waiting for? Everyone, let's go to war. With a wave of Ivan Vanke's hand, hundreds of steel soldiers rushed towards the Avengers members without any hesitation. The Avengers here. Watching hundreds of steel soldiers rushing densely, Su Che rushed over immediately, and then with a strong wrist, he threw the death knife directly at the group of steel soldiers. The 3-meter-long giant blade of death circled at high speed mixed with the sharp sound of piercing the air, rushing into the steel soldiers like a deadly scythe. Crack. Zhi Lala. The extremely sharp giant blade is almost unstoppable. Even those steel soldiers are extremely strong, but they are still chopped off by the giant blade of death. The place cut by the steel soldier that cut through the waist made a sound like an electric current. After hovering in the air for a while, the giant death blade unexpectedly flew back into Su's hand again. Su Che, who was the first to charge towards the steel 3-0 soldier, caught the death giant blade flying back with one hand. Ling Kong kicked away the steel soldier standing in front of him. Then he rushed into the steel soldiers with the giant death blade in his hand like a god descending from the earth, and those powerful steel soldiers with the giant death blade in his hand had no enemy. Ivan Vanke, holding 2 electric current whips, looked in disbelief at the Silver Moon Knight who was constantly fighting among the steel soldiers. He couldn't believe that the iron soldier he created was as fragile as a piece of paper in front of the Silver Moon Knight holding a giant blade. You know, those steel soldiers are made of the strongest materials themselves. After I was rescued from prison by the so-called messenger. With the help of the messenger's power, he bewitched Justin Hammer, and then used the weapon materials in hammer industry to make steel soldiers. And I have tested the sturdiness of these steel legions. Even micro-missiles can't destroy these steel soldiers. With these steel soldiers, plus the so-called messenger of the gods, Ivan Vanke absolutely believes that he can easily eliminate this so-called Avengers. Even with this Iron Legion, I can crush that damned Tony Stark to death like a bug. But now looking at the Silver Moon Knight in the Iron Legion who is as unstoppable as a god, and everywhere he passes is cut down. Watch as the Berserk Hulk snatches up an iron soldier and throws them at other iron soldiers. And that Thor with a hammer and knocking down iron soldiers after iron soldiers. For a split second, Ivan Vanke was astonished. My proudest Iron Legion, my most powerful iron soldiers, are so vulnerable to the Avengers? This made Ivan, who was extremely proud in his heart, unacceptable. Especially facing that slaughtering iron soldiers is as easy as cutting tofu, Silver Moon Knight. Ivan Vanke's eyes were full of anger. Go to hell, you bloody accomplice. Holding 2 whips filled with electric current, he threw them heavily at Su Che. Ivan Vanke wished to use the powerful electric current to directly burn this damned Silver Moon Knight to ashes. Su Che, who was constantly fighting among the steel soldiers, suddenly noticed the sound of an attack coming from the side. Without even looking back, he casually stretched out his hand to grab the crackling whip rope, allowing the strong electric current to keep flickering on him. Oh, that's it. Looking at the whip rope that was grasped by him with one hand and flashing electric current sparks, Yin glanced at it because of his own movement. Ivan Vanke looked disbelieving at the moment. Even mushroom eggs can't cause substantial damage to oneself, let alone this so-called electric current. This is impossible. He looked at Su Che who grabbed himself with one hand and was filled with high-voltage electric current, but he didn't suffer any damage at all. Ivan Vanke couldn't believe what he saw. Little cutie, you don't even know what is impossible. Grabbing the whip rope and pulling it hard, he watched Ivan Vanke who flew towards him involuntarily because of the traction. Su Che sent him flying with a sidekick. Boom. Boom. Ivan Vanki, who was kicked out, smashed heavily into a house next to the street, and the electric current that exploded in the next second scattered the entire building and was directly destroyed. The collapsed roof buried Ivan Vanki under the ruins. After controlling Mjolnir to knock out the surrounding steel soldiers, Thor fell from the air to Su Che. Hey man, I always feel that what you just said sounds awkward to me. Although to be honest, this sentence is very touching, but I don't want anyone to say this to me in the future. Looking at Thor's relaxed face, he even thought about discussing what he just said to the whip. Su Che chuckled, and flicked the giant deathblade in his hand, splitting the iron soldier rushing towards him in two. Hundreds of steel soldiers looked a lot, but in fact, in front of the Avengers, it was not enough to look at. Especially in front of Su Che, who is holding a giant deathblade, these guys are just looking at the ferocious tofu. Wow. That's it. Slowly gathering around Su Che, they saw that they had almost been cleaned up, only a few steel soldiers who were still being beaten and torn apart by Hulk as if they were toys. Tony Stark spread his hands. I thought how strong he was, but that's all it turned out to be. The Mark Soil skewers I made are 10 times stronger than them. Listen to Tony's show-off tone. Steve shook his head holding the shield. Hey, guy who doesn't wash his hair, is that all you can do? Don't just die so easily. If you have the ability, get some more, you haven't had enough of your father. With his hands raised to his lips, Tony Stark yelled at Ivan Vanki, who was buried under the collapsed house. As a result, in the next second, on the streets full of shattered steel soldiers, the fog of fear gradually dissipated. Rows of houses that were originally connected to both sides began to collapse in an instant. Among the dusty ruins, extremely terrifying creatures crawled out of the ground one after another. Giant lizard, giant octopus over 5 meters tall, dozens of Chitauri apparently dead, bloodthirsty wolves with sharp teeth. Watching one after another monsters come out from under the collapsed houses. Holding the shield tightly, Steve sighed, turned his head to Tony and said helplessly, "Do you really have to ask this question?" Steve's voice fell, and soon, a guy wearing a cloak and a magic circle at his feet appeared in front of everyone. "Give up your resistance, respectable strong men of the earth, I will give you the last dignity. Everything is predestined. When the great master descends on the earth, you will find that any ignorant resistance is futile. It's finally out. Look at the guy in the magic cloak created by the system." Su Che breathed a sigh of relief. Just come out. This guy is way smarter than Olivia Temple. It's Westview again, it's Loki again, it's the wonderful illusion of the fog of fear again. Even the octopus monster, the bloodthirsty giant wolf, and the Whipsteel Legion were all produced. If it wasn't for Red Skull John Schmidt, that guy would be on Vomir Star right now. I'm afraid he can even get the Red Skull out. Is it really the way to connect vertically and horizontally? Fortunately, the power of Dormammu was not released. Otherwise, I'm afraid the Ancient One magician would have appeared long ago. This is the messenger of that god. Looking at the guy wearing a magic cloak in front of him, stepping on the magic circle and slowly rising into the air. Tony Stark took a step forward. It is indeed much more gorgeous than those jugglers in the circus. Sue, after you said that we defeated him, I started to buy a circus and let him perform tricks there every day. With him here, I think the tickets will definitely be sold. Listening to Tony Stark's poisonous tongue, Su Che didn't speak. Clint Barton on the side laughed. I can't say anything else, but I am very familiar with the circus. If this guy can really be caught in the circus to do tricks, then I guarantee that the attendance rate will be full every day. But having said that, no wonder you are a billionaire among our group of people. With your business acumen, you are really amazing. That is. Hearing Barton's praise, Tony Stark raised his eyebrows triumphantly, and then shouted at the guy standing in midair. Hey, juggler, did you hear what we just said? As long as you agree, I will definitely give you the highest salary in the entire circus. Isn't this much better than the stupid master you serve? The magician hadn't been angry with Tony's words just now. But after hearing Tony say something about his stupid master, this guy's eyes were instantly filled with endless rage. You stupid and ignorant earthling. Dare to blaspheme my great master. I will definitely break your iron shell and tear you to pieces. As soon as the voice fell, the surrounding monsters and giant beasts roared angrily. Outside Westview. Jane, the signal value has started to scale up. Seeing that the values on the computer kept rising, Daisy immediately summoned Jane Foster. After hearing Daisy's words, Jane Foster, who was looking at the magic barrier, ran over immediately. Go to the computer and watch the data on the instrument continue to climb. Jane Foster and Daisy looked at each other. What will happen to the rapid increase in data? Boom. With a gesture of explosion, Daisy stared at Jane Foster. Oh shit. Saying something in unison, the two immediately shouted at the group of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents around them. Just before the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents could hear what they were shouting, the translucent magic barrier covering Zijing Town began to make crackling sounds. Cracks covered the entire translucent magic barrier in an instant. It looks like glass has been smashed. Oops. Seeing this scene, Jane Foster immediately yelled at the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and then took Daisy and ran behind the RV to hide. The two of them had just hid when they heard a violent explosion. The powerful airwaves blew smoke and dust all around, and the temporary tent camp was even blown into the sky. Squatting behind the caravan and protecting his head tightly, he let the smoke, dust and gravel from the airwave keep flying around. After the blast wave gradually disappeared, Jane Foster and Daisy slowly stood up from the ground. Oh my god. Looking at Zijing Town, which was originally peaceful, it has turned into ruins at this moment. In the midst of the ruins, Natasha Romanoff and Barton and Steve are dealing with the Chitauri and cyborg monsters that used to be. Thor is fighting with a hammer and huge amounts of octopus monsters, Hulk punches a giant wolf, and Iron Man is also controlling the armor, constantly supporting everyone. All of a sudden, the entire Avengers was battling those chilling fears. My god, Jane, look at the world. Pulling arrow, Foster's arm pointed into the air. Daisy's eyes turned dazzling, and among the members of the Avengers Alliance, her favorite was the Silver Moon Knight. And at this moment, the Silver Moon Knight in the air is holding that giant deathblade and fighting with that guy in the bamboo hat. Compared with the battle on the ground, the battle in the air is now more intense. Especially the guy in the magic cloak who keeps using all kinds of magic. It's as dazzling as making a special effects movie again. Save people first. Looking at Daisy's excited look, Jane Foss knew that at this moment, it was like a fan seeing an idol performing live. But Jane Foster didn't pay much attention to Su Che. Glancing at Thor holding his hammer, he was fighting the octopus monster. Jane Foster immediately pulled Daisy to rescue those S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were knocked to the ground by the blast wave before they could dodge in time. In the battle belonging to Avengers, all agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. usually participate. Not to mention these rookie-level agents who have just been overturned by the blast. Some rookies with lesser injuries also know to get up off the ground and help some of the more seriously injured guys. As for those who hit a rock or passed out on a tree, they can only wait for others to rescue them. Air. Chains exuding black mist tightened Su Che tightly from all directions, and then countless poisonous tongues appeared instantly, rushing straight to attack Su Che. Facing the attacks of the snakes summoned by magic, a mobile barrier appeared around Su Che, who was chained by iron chains to isolate these snakeheads. Then the black profound liquid was instantly covered with the chains that bound Su Che, and then there were bursts of roaring explosions from Su Che's body. A violent explosion formed a sea of flames in the sky. The smoke from the explosion has not yet dissipated. Thousands of pieces of ice broke through the fog in an instant, and went straight to the magician to attack. The crystal clear ice cones are rendered into a deadly sickle by the color of the explosion, and it seems that each ice cone can pierce everything in front of it. Seeing this scene, the magician raised his hand to draw a circle in the air, and a golden portal appeared, directly throwing the ice cone attacking himself behind the magic gate. But then, as if sensing something, he turned around in the air, picked up the dagger, and stabbed directly at the words. Ah! The dagger pierced Su Che's chest, but there was no blood splash as imagined, but a crisp snapping sound. Before the magician backed away quickly or used a magic attack, Su Che pinched his neck with one hand in the next second. Did no one tell you that magicians should fly a kite remotely? After all, Su Che exerted strength with one hand, and the magician's neck was crushed in an instant. Ground. Call. Grab a Chitauri weapon and kill him, and look at Chitauri who has been pierced through his head, but still stands up. Natasha Romanoff rolled sideways to avoid the energy attack, and then panted heavily. This is much more difficult than the battle with Chittori more than a month ago. The neck was pierced, the body was punched with a big hole, even half of the head fell off, and they are still alive. Will these guys not die? An arrow flew through the air and pierced a Chittori, and the red light at the tip of the arrow began to flash, followed by a violent explosion. Although the range of the explosion was small, it directly blasted a dozen surrounding Chittori into several pieces. Just looking at Chittori, who was blown into several pieces, but still crawled towards his side. Barton took out another arrow and said, "It seems that the problem is not with Chittori. These guys are already dead, it should be that magician who used his energy to get them out." Not far away, holding the shield reflected the energy of Tony's palm, watching the energy repel a row of giant wolves. Steve threw the shield over the head of a half-man, half-robot, and quickly followed. Grab the shield stuck on the neck of the cyborg and pull it hard, directly cutting off the head of the cyborg. Just looking at the cyborg's head still moving, Steve raised his foot and crushed it. Clint is right, it seems that the key point is not with us. He turned his head to look at Hulk and Thor, who was fighting the giant lizard. Steve raised his head and looked at Su Che, who was bound by countless chains in the air. "Su, hurry up and get rid of this magician. If you don't get rid of him, then these guys will never die." Steve Rogers has great confidence in Su Che's strength. After all, even with Thor and Hulk, Su is still the most powerful existence in the Avengers alliance. This point is recognized. So don't look at Su Che being chained up in the air right now, but Steve doesn't think that a mere messenger magician can make Su admit defeat. Although, this guy's ability is quite gorgeous, even more gorgeous than the special effects of the old movie using a lightsaber that I watched on TV 2 days ago. Su Che didn't speak, what he answered was a series of shocking explosions. The violent explosion turned the entire sky red, and when the magician used the magic circle to defend against the ice cone, Su Che appeared behind the envoy magician. Looking at the air, Su Che pinched the magician's neck without any hesitation. On the ground, the giant lizard Shujian, which was fighting with Thor, stopped moving, and then fell to the ground with a plop in an extremely exaggerated posture. Seeing the lizard suddenly lose its vitality, Thor held the hammer and looked at it vigilantly. He also stretched out his foot and touched it lightly. Thor was relieved to find that the damned lizard was really dead. Turning his head, he found that the other members of the Avengers alliance were doing the same thing. The bloodthirsty wolves fighting the Hulk, the half-human, half-cyborg creatures from Steve and Tony, and the Chittori on Natasha Romanoff and Barton's side. All of them lost their vitality in an instant. Seeing this, Thor breathed a sigh of relief. Is it over? On a hill in the distance, it should be considered over. Subconsciously touching his neck, Loki always felt that when Su Che pinched the messenger magician's neck just now, his neck also had a tight feeling. Turning his head to look at the guy next to him, Loki spread his hands and said, "You really found the wrong person. I don't know any time administration, let alone time crimes. I know that as the #1 magician in the 9 realms, there are indeed many people who worship me and want to pretend to be me. I understand this very well. But, I'm not the imposter you're looking for." Listening to Loki's words, Mobius folded his arms and looked at him quietly. After a moment, Mobius laughed. "I definitely know that you are not the Loki who came to this universe. Just like I am not the Mobius next to Loki. In fact, according to the files of the Time Administration, there are many parallel worlds in the universe. But the problem now is that Loki brought another Mobius to make a big fuss in the Time Administration. And also snatched the ruling weapon and then cut himself off. No one knows what exactly happened. However, many people have seen with their own eyes that after I said a lot of inexplicable words, it brought chaos to the Time Management Bureau. The end result is that I was put on the list of the Time Management Bureau. Unless there is strong evidence, I will most likely be tried." Having said that, Mobius looked at the control ring on Loki's neck. "I don't know what all this is about. But obviously, all of this has something to do with us. So I need your cooperation and go to the Time Administration with me. Perhaps after the investigation of the incident is clear, I will let you go." After all, what Loki said is right. The one who knows Loki best will always be Loki himself. Ah. Hearing what Mobius said, Loki raised his eyebrows and snorted lightly. So, is this an invitation? But since it is an invitation, then I should be able to refuse it. Loki tried to escape with the space gem, but this damn guy in front of him pressed a button, and the time and space around him slowed down. Not even the space gem can escape with him. So, since you can't run away, let's be reasonable. Loki, you can take this as an invitation. Definitely, you were originally supposed to be a time criminal to be arrested by the Time Administration. Many things in the universe are predestined, but because of the appearance of that Suche, the fate of most of you has been rewritten. That is to say, people who break through and change the original trajectory of their destiny can actually be called time criminals. But the source is here at Suche, so, since the root cause is that Suche, why don't you go and catch him? Facing what Mobius said, Loki spread his hands. Since he changed everyone's fate, then you all go and catch him. We dare not. Listening to Loki's words, Mobius looked at Loki very sincerely. We have simulated the arrest of Suche. Although the early stage was relatively smooth, the next thing after the arrest is based on the simulation. We found that once we did that, the Time Administration would be replaced. That's why the judge didn't issue an arrest order. Looking at Mobius's extremely sincere expression, Loki almost laughed out of anger. The root of all co-authors comes from Suche, but if you can't beat him, you dare not catch him, and then turn your head and come and catch me. Hey, I, Loki, the dignified second prince of Asgard, son of Odin, the greatest magician of the 9 realms, the god of lies and jokes, and the first heir to the king of Jotunheim. In the end, you guys pinch it like a soft persimmon? Are you still human? Can you do something that people should do? Depend on. Loki and Hill Wei in the parallel world killed Kong, the remnant who created the Time Administration, and became separated from Hill Wei as a result. In order to find the Hill dimension, it turned out that Loki and Mobius came to this universe. After coming to this universe, Mobius borrowed his identity and Loki checked the timeline of this world in the Time Management Bureau. It is discovered that there is Suche on the timeline of this world, and because of Suche, what happened in this world is very different from the world where Loki lives. According to Loki's research, perhaps in the future they will need Suche's help when they deal with Kong, to be precise, when dealing with the countless variants of Kong in the Kang's meeting. So Loki and Mobius made a big fuss with the Time Administration, while everyone's attention was attracted by Mobius. Pretending to be the Loki of this universe, he took 6 infinite gems from the Time Administration and handed them to Suche. After things are done, continue to go to other universes to continue looking for the Hill dimension. Loki leaves with Mobius. As a result, after the Time Management Bureau was restored, the Mobius of this world was stunned. Someone pretended to be him, and then made a big fuss with the Time Administration, and as a result, he was also wanted by the Time Administration and became a time offender. Fortunately, he was very close to that female judge. So the female judge agrees that Mobius proves his innocence. And then, the Loki of this universe is out of luck. Who told another Mobius who was with Loki to say, the only one who knows Loki best is Loki? Mobius' only hope now is pinned on this Loki in front of him. So naturally it is impossible to let him go away. What are you kidding? Although I don't know why the self in the parallel universe will stand with Loki and rebel against the Time Administration. But I am extremely loyal to the Time Administration. Well, that's roughly how things went. So, at this moment, Loki looks at Mobius who is smiling like a good guy in front of him, but he is extremely upset. Good guy, you Time Management Bureau also bullies the weak and fears the hard? What are you doing with yourself? If you have the ability, why don't you take away another time offender, that Silver Moon Knight Suche? Depend on. No matter how Loki forcibly swallows the urge to curse that doesn't fit his noble and elegant status, he was still taken away by Mobius. After all, with Mobius who has a time lock, Loki really has no way to resist. With Loki being taken away by Mobius, on the battlefield not far away, watching all the enemies all lose their lives, Steve raised his head and looked at Suche who was falling with the corpse of the messenger magician. Then he let out a long sigh of relief and laughed. It's finally over. Yeah, it's finally over. Looking at the corpse created by the system in his hand, Tu's expression did not show any joy. According to the system prompt just now, the progress bar of the only main mission calling for the arrival of Galactus has actually increased to 30%. You must know that after the first Olivia Temple was killed by himself, the progress bar was only about 10%. As a result, after the messenger magician was eliminated by himself, the progress bar actually increased to 3%. Could it be that the more villains who can cause trouble, the higher the progress bar before Galactus arrives? If this is the case, then be careful when creating your next enemy. After all, although he is now invincible in physical defense and legal defense, compared with Galactus, one of the 5 great gods, it seems that he is really not his opponent. Although, I am sure that I can escape, but this universe must be destroyed. Know that while every major Marvel event doesn't feel complete without sacrificing Galactus once. But in fact, Galactus is definitely not as weak as those big events. Even as a planet devourer, he can be regarded as one of the top 5 gods. It seems that the Earth has been completely exposed to the aliens. Coming to Su Che's side, Tony Stark controlled the battle armor and sat on the stone. Looking at Zijing Town, which was originally peaceful and peaceful, all the houses were destroyed at this moment, turning into ruins one after another. Under the slack expression, there was a dignified look in his eyes. Especially when he thought of the end of the world scene he saw from Sus Fantasy in the church. If the Earth is attacked by a more powerful alien civilization again next time. So simply relying solely on Avengers, can the Earth be saved? He breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe he had conceived since the Chitauri invasion. Should start preparing. It's like Nick Fury has been preparing for Avengers back then. Just. Why did Nick Fury have the idea of forming Avengers? Has he also seen aliens? Yeah, it's finally over. Raising her hands to shake the dust from her wine-red hair, Natasha Romanoff put away her weapons and sat beside the crowd with a smile. But everyone, maybe we can get out of here. The disaster department came to tidy up the scene. Maybe it won't be long before the peace and tranquility of the weekdays will be restored. Can it really be restored? Listening to Natasha Romanoff's words, Tony, who was wondering what he was thinking, suddenly raised his head and looked at Natasha Romanoff. Definitely, although it is impossible to restore every house one by one, it is still possible to rebuild a house for the town residents and provide some compensation. Looking at Tony, Natasha Romanoff said with a smile. Facing Natasha Romanoff's swearing words, Tony nodded but did not speak. What I asked and what Natasha Romanoff answered seems to be a question, but in fact, it is not a question. Natasha Romanoff answered the house. And what I asked was confidence, or the human heart. It was after the alien invasion, when the Avengers completely failed. Even if the house can be rebuilt, then, okay, don't think so much. Looking at Tony, who was deep in thought, Su Che stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. No matter what, this matter is finally over. Guys, maybe we should go back and wash up now. In addition, Clint's wife is about to give birth. At this time, we cannot deprive Clint of the joy of becoming a father for the first time. Hearing what Su Che said, everyone remembered that Barton's wife was about to give birth. Wow. I almost forgot about this. Standing up from the stone, Tony Stark walked forward like the others, smiled and hugged Clint and said congratulations. Yes. Let's talk about the future. The most important thing now is not to think about these things. But after the big battle, you should relax. Aliens have powerful weapons and strength. But, we Earth has the Silver Moon Knight, Su Che.